Thank you, Peter Doherty. It's good to be at the City Club of Chicago again. Special recognition to the new Chief of Staff of the new Mayor, Teresa Mental. Thank you for being here today. I had breakfast with Ram about 2 weeks ago. It was 29 minutes long. I'm a little bit too old to have any personal knowledge of this, but it reminded me of a cross somewhere between speed dating and being the umpire at the center court at Wimbledon. We had 29 topics in 29 minutes, and he pulled out his card 3 times, so I figure I must have struck a good note with him there. So sometimes being in public life, those of you who are there or have been there know that your ratings aren't too good. Well, at this moment in time, the approval ratings for Congress are at record lows. I've heard all kinds of different numbers ranging from 6 to 14. One was 28, which I thought was pretty good news. The president's numbers dipped. He's at 46%. But before I got too depressed, I read something over the weekend that gave me some hope. The Public Policy Polling Institute recently did a survey of 928 American voters. And they were asked whether or not they approved or disapproved of the job that God was doing. God's overall approval rating is 52%, with 9 disapproving. So, 28, 46 sound at least in the ballpark. God got his highest marks for handling the creation of the universe, 71 to 5. Handling of the animal kingdom, only 56 to 11. And handling of natural disasters, you'd expect that one to be low 50. So even God has a bad day when they're taking a poll. There's a sour mood among the electorate, and it recalls a story that Jim Houlihan might have told me a long time ago about a young man who had decided to seek a priestly vocation, and he found a monastery that he thought was perfect. And he went in and met with the abbot of the monastery, who said, "You have to understand that we have a vow of silence here, and if you become one of our monks, you will be in your cell, unable to speak to anyone, with one exception. Once every 10 years, you can come into my office and you can say 2 words. So pray on this and think it over before you make your final decision." Prayed on it, came back and said, "I'm ready to go." He went through the training and went through the ordination, became a monk, went to his cell and prayed. And after 10 years, he was invited into the abbot's office. The door was closed, and the abbot said, "Well, 10 years of your life given to this great vocation. You have 2 words. What would you say?" He said, "Cold food." Sent him back to his cell. 10 years later, he came in. The abbot again said, "Well, 20 years now you've been here. 2 words. What would you say?" And he said, "Hard bed." Left and went back to his cell. And at the end of the 30th year, he came in, met with the abbot. And the abbot said, "And what are your 2 words?" And he said, "I quit." And the abbot said, "I'm not surprised. You've done nothing but complain since you came here." But when you take a look at why the American people are in a sour mood and complaining, there's good reason. This economy is extremely weak. It is recovering. We see job creation, certainly not fast enough. And when you look at some of the elements behind the numbers, they tell the story. The new jobs figures released Friday show a very slight improvement. Nationally, the unemployment rate dipped to 9.1%. In the Chicagoland area, 9.2%. There are at least 5 job seekers for every available job in America. And at one point last year, fewer than half of working-age Americans had a job. More layoffs are coming. The number of planned layoffs at U.S. firms rose to a 16-month high in July. We also know that families are struggling. 55% of all American families are living paycheck to paycheck. Nearly half of Americans are financially fragile. In a recent survey, more than half the people asked said they definitely or probably could not come up with $2,000 in 30 days if they were hit with an unexpected expense like a major car repair or copay on a medical bill. How did they become so financially fragile? According to the Federal Reserve, between 2007 and 2009, in just 2 years, median household net worth fell by 23%. The value of families' principal homes dropped an average of $18,000. Families that owned stocks saw their portfolios drop by more than a third. In the Chicago area, average home values have sunk to their 2001 levels. About 1 out of every 4 Chicago area homeowners with a mortgage is underwater. Some of these numbers are stunning. Between 1950 and 1980, the average income of the bottom 90% of American earners grew by just 75% over a 30-year period of time. Then middle-class workers hit a wall. Between 1980 and 2008, the bottom 90% saw their incomes increase by just 1%. Not 1% a year, 1% over 28 years. I really believe when you look at this economy, there are several elements that are holding us back. One of them is real estate prices. I don't think we have found the bottom yet. And I think until we do, some communities will continue to see foreclosures and uncertainty. And with that uncertainty, fewer will invest in home ownership. There's also a major problem with family debt. In 1990, the average household debt was 76% of household income. By 2007, household debt hit 128% of household income. That's a 2/3 increase in just 17 years. Since the recession hit, people have been paying down their debt. It's down to 106% of income. They estimate it'll take at least 9 years to get back to 1990 levels. In October of last year, unheralded, student loan debt for the first time in America surpassed credit card debt, over $950 billion. Parents and students, young children, are getting deep in debt in ways that were unimaginable in my time of going to school. And that debt, of course, is not dischargeable in bankruptcy. Unfortunately, or coincidentally, at the same time, the people at the very top of the income scale in America have done extremely well. The average wage for members of the exclusive club, just under $519 million of the top earners, $91 million more than the year before, $10 million in weekly pay. Luxury goods are being sold at record levels. Tiffany's first quarter sales up 20% over last year. Porsche first half profits rose 59%. Nordstrom has a waiting list for a Chanel sequin tweed coat with a $9,000 price tag. But last week we learned that 15% of all Americans now depend on food stamps to make ends meet. In the state of Michigan, it's 1 out of 4. Walmart tracks their sales by the minute, and they can gauge their sales against the price of gasoline. When gasoline goes up, people stay home. They don't purchase, and Walmart feels it all the way across America. And you know that gasoline prices hit a high. Recently, I hope they continue to come down a little bit at least. That is the state of the economy, and it's the state of thinking of most American families, that as hard as they work, they keep falling behind. When you ask people across America what is the number one issue today, it is no surprise their answer is not the deficit, it's the jobs and the economy. Therein lies our challenge in Washington. We are focusing on the deficit, which is truly a national problem, and not focusing on the creation of jobs and turning this economy around. I gave a little speech on the Senate floor a couple weeks ago, and I said, this agreement on the debt ceiling is the final interment of John Maynard Keynes, because it basically said we are going to stop spending money as a government to try to spark this economy. Instead, we will focus on cutting spending, which if you took the same economics course I did not that many years ago, well, maybe it was a few, but if you took that same economics course, you understand that many people think that's the wrong direction for us to be going in. So let's talk about the obvious story du jour, Standard & Poor's. And that, of course, is something that is stunning. For the first time in American history, our economy has been downgraded by one of the three major rating agencies. Now, I can engage you and you can engage me about whether Standard & Poor's has any credibility after the subprime mortgage crisis. They were found complicit in that. They signed off on all those rotten securities that ended up cratering the economy, and they gave them a clean bill of health when they should not have done it. But having raised that obvious historical point, you cannot ignore the obvious. We are deeper in debt now than we've been perhaps forever, going back to World War II. We borrow 40 cents for every dollar we spend in Washington. That's on everything, from the defense of this nation to food stamps. That is unsustainable. And we have talked about what to do and how to approach it. I've been involved in this for a year and a half. I was thrust into it by Harry Reid on the Bowles-Simpson Commission. And we came up with a plan that I thought was reasonable. It does what I think is central to answering this challenge, putting everything, underline everything, on the table. We have to put revenue on the table. There is no other way to deal with the deficit honestly. Currently, the revenue coming into the federal government represents 15% of our gross domestic product. That is the lowest percentage of GDP for federal revenue in 60 years. The Bush tax cuts and those things associated with it took prodigious amounts, $2 trillion, of what would otherwise have been received by the government. At the same time, with the stimulus bill, the president put money into the economy at the beginning of his term, and our spending is at about 25% of gross domestic product. The delta, the 10%, equals the deficit, roughly $1.3, $1.4 trillion. The obvious answer is to bring spending down and revenue up. Bringing revenue up can be done in a sensible way. Currently, we have a tax code, which, unless you're a tax lawyer or accountant, is almost impossible to understand. And the tax code is loaded with credits, deductions, exclusions, all sorts of special favors and earmarks for special friends. It's been loaded over the years and in language that most people can't even comprehend, except those who need to. And what they've done is build into the tax code $1.2 trillion a year in money not collected by the federal government. That, coincidentally, is exactly the same number of the receipts we have from personal income tax in the United States of America. So what taxpayers give, the tax code gives away. Some of the deductions and credits in the tax code are extremely valuable, and most of us use it, but not everybody. 2/3 of the American people do not itemize deductions. So unless it is a refundable tax credit or something like the exclusion for employers for health insurance premiums, there's no direct benefit for 2/3 of Americans. The 1/3 takes advantage of them. People like us who itemize on our tax returns. Items like mortgage interest that we're going to pay on our homes, charitable deductions, state and local taxes, all of these things. So what I'm saying is, if we take an honest look at this tax code and find ways of reducing these tax expenditures, we can do two things. We can take a portion of the money saved there, generated in revenue, to reduce the deficit, and the remainder to reduce marginal tax rates on individuals. That, to me, makes sense. Bringing down marginal tax rates is going to help everybody, lower, middle, upper income individuals. And reducing the number of tax expenditures, if we do it sensibly, will not kill off many of the incentives we built in the tax code. No, I do not want to eliminate the mortgage interest deduction, but I'm ready to talk about whether it applies to a second home and whether it applies to every home, no matter what the value. I think it's worth the conversation. When it comes to charitable deductions, I know what's going to come when we talk about this. It's already started from pastors and rabbis and those who are in different religious groups. These are important elements in the money they collect. I understand that. But we can talk about whether or not we should have any reasonable limitations on that or any other deduction. Secondly, we have got to put entitlements on the table. This makes my friends in the Democratic Party nervous, but it's time we talk straight. Here's what we need to understand. I believe in Social Security. I'm proud of Social Security. When we've watched savings diminish, when we've watched pension plans disappear in bankruptcy court, Social Security is still there. And today, untouched, Social Security will make every single promised payment with a cost of living adjustment for the next 25 years. Can't say that about anything else in government. 25 years of solvency. But on the 26th year, the amount of payments dropped 22%. So we know it's coming. I feel, and I hope others agree, making small changes today that play out like the miracle of compound interest can buy longer solvency and longer life for Social Security. And I think we need to be open to that conversation. Preserving what Social Security is. It is the anchor for most people in retirement. It may not be all that you need, but it is there. And for some people, it's all they have. And we cannot walk away from that, never should. But we need to talk about it. Now, when it comes to Medicare, it's a different story. A different story because it has, at best, 12 years of solvency, only 12. And the cost of health care keeps going up. This year, on January 1st, 10,000 Americans reached the age of 65. On January 2nd, 10,000 more. January 3rd, and every day since, and every day for the next 19 years, 10,000 people a day. The rolls under Social Security and Medicare are now welcoming in the boomers who paid throughout their lives, through their working lives, with the understanding that when the time came, Social Security and Medicare would be there for them. There are ways for us to address Medicare and deal with it, I think, in an honest way and reduce the increasing costs of health care. We have to take that challenge on. It's absolutely essential. When it comes to spending cuts, we've really made that down payment. Maybe there's more, there could be, but when you consider where all the cuts have come from so far, this entire year, the spending cuts in Washington, in Congress, all came from non-defense domestic discretionary, 12% of the budget. That is the piñata we've been whacking at now for 8 months. And when you look inside that 12% slice, you will find Head Start, Pell Grants, college student loans, budgets for Argonne and Fermilab, the National Institute of Health, the transportation bill, and a lot of other things that are pretty essential to the future of this country. So we better take care that we don't go too deeply into that for fear that we're going to violate Lord Keynes' observation that you have to have some stimulus coming from the government for job retraining, for example, research that leads to new products. All of these things, I think, are worth the investment. Now, there's been a lot of bad news out of Washington over the last few months. Let me tell you some good news. There were 6 of us who sat down after the Bowles-Simpson Commission. 3 Dems, 3 Republican senators. We worked for 6 months. I was kind of the odd person in the room. The rest of them were kind of flinty-eyed conservatives, but I stuck around. They didn't kick me out, Danny. I just stayed there as long as I could. And we ended up with a proposal. And the proposal would reduce the deficit by $4 trillion over 10 years by putting everything on the table. The 6 of us finally decided 2 weeks ago to roll it out. We invited about 75 members of the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, to come and see the rollout, see what they thought. 49 senators showed up, equally divided between Democrats and Republicans. And at the end of it, 36 of those senators said, sign me up. Half Democrats and half Republicans. So at a time when we can't get any agreement when it comes to dealing with the future of the deficit between the House and the Senate, there is a bipartisan force at work in the Senate that I think has the potential of guiding us toward deficit reduction in a sensible way. We deal with revenue, entitlements, and spending. And unless you deal with all 3, you can't solve the problem. You end up taking too much out of one portion of it, and it just won't work. Now, what lies ahead is going to be interesting, because as part of this agreement that extended the debt ceiling, we're going to create a joint committee. It is a committee that has an incredible mandate. When we return in the first week in September, we have literally 10 weeks. 10 weeks to form this 12-person committee, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, and come up with a proposal that we enact by majority vote. That's the tricky part. And then submit it to the House and the Senate. If they approve it, That'll be the roadmap for the next $1.5 trillion in cuts. If they don't approve it, automatic cuts take place, all on the spending side. Nothing in entitlements, nothing in revenue. But they're pretty deep cuts. It'll come out to be a net, I should say a gross, of about $1 trillion in cuts in the defense budget. Secretary of Defense over 10 years. Secretary of Defense Panetta said, too hard, too deep, don't do it. And additional cuts on the non-defense side, which, as I've said to you already, has been whacked pretty hard in the course of this conversation. So we hope that we've created a bipartisan incentive for us to find an agreement and to submit it to our colleagues in the Congress and enact it. Let me say a word about the president. You all know that he's my friend. He was my colleague, and I encouraged him to run. And I do believe that he has had an incredibly difficult job. I don't think he knew, or any of us knew, the size of this hole that we were falling into when he was elected. He faced a massive debt from a previous administration, and the first year's budget, $1.2 trillion in deficit. In the first 3 months he was president, we lost 700,000 jobs in America. So it was a tough welcome for the president to the White House. He moved on a stimulus package. I wish it were larger. I don't think it was large enough. 40% of it, tax cuts, in the hopes of making it bipartisan. Didn't work. Couldn't get a single House Republican to vote for any part of the stimulus package. And in the end, to get 3 Republican senators to vote for it, he had to cut the size of the package even more. So it didn't have the impact that it might have had on the economy, though I do believe it helped. Since then, he's been struggling to try to right this boat and at the same time focusing on deficit reduction. I've talked to him many times. I've been in many meetings. He is committed to reducing this nation's debt. He is trying to time it so that we do it in a fashion where we can get through this recession before we get into the deep cut areas. And it's a pretty tough assignment. We're going to return the first week in September, and I hope that we do it in a bipartisan spirit. If the Standard & Poor's rating downgrade, whether you believe it or not, has any value, I hope it will muster a bipartisan response of members of the House and Senate who will stand up and say, all right, that's a wake-up call. What that Standard & Poor rating said more than anything was, to get the economics right, you've got to get the politics right. We can't have this continued deadlock. We can't have these high noon scenarios being played out month after month. It's not good for our weak economy, and it certainly is going to hurt us when it comes to our ratings in the world view at a time when we don't want that to happen. So I hope that this will be the wake-up call we need to come back and work on a bipartisan basis. I hope this joint committee will be the starting point. Let me stop at this point and answer any questions which you might have.
Ms. Ginny, where are you? If you have a question, Ms. Ginny will be. You got a couple hours? Here we go. From Courtney Hederman, AARP. Who will be appointed to the Joint Committee? Can you clear it up whether you'll be on it? So we'll leave it at that.
I don't know the appointees. I'm a little discouraged, but I hope it was just window dressing when the Republican leaders that said they would appoint no one who would agree to increase in revenues. That is not a good starting point. I hope that we all come to this with an open mind. I'm not saying, let me clarify that. When I say we hope we all do, I have not been appointed to that committee. I haven't heard whether I will be.
Great.
The hits just keep on.
Yeah, listen, hold on here. We will do that. That's that. Harry Reid. Okay, this one's from Bob Manwith, old WGN radio employee. What happened to the civility and collegiality of the Dirksen-Douglas era?
Dirksen and Douglas didn't speak to one another. But there was a bipartisan civility. That's true, incidentally. There was a bipartisan civility that not that long ago, Rostenkowski Michael, I mean, those things did happen, and they should happen again. I tell you, the only glimmer of hope I have is this gang of 6 and 36 people, including my colleague Senator Kirk, who stepped up and said, on a bipartisan basis, we ought to do this together. So I do think there is a potential there, and I hope we can build on it.
By the way, if you don't belong to the City Club, it is lines like that. It has actually shot up to the top, our membership, so there's a few spots left. You're not going to hear that at the Executive Club. All right. Jeff Riley, Riley Public Affairs. Now, this is a toughie. You could pass on this one. Where do you stand on the repeal of Section 526 of the Energy Bill? We'll get back to you on that one.
527 is the one that really angers me.
Yeah. That inflation's a killer. All right, here we go. This is from Al Manning. Well, a longtime City Club member, former big voice down in Springfield, Mr. Culverton, you remember that. Would you elaborate on two economic-related bills? The New York Times recently editorialized in favor of your bill on unemployment compensation. All right, and your bill on bankruptcy reform on foreclosures.
Well, I tell you, when it comes to the unemployment compensation, I do think we need this. And the president's tried to extend it. When you talk about motivating this economy, the money that is given in unemployment compensation payments goes directly into the economy. These folks are literally waiting, check to check. So that money is spent quickly and does have a positive impact on the economy, let alone from a humanitarian viewpoint, is helping some families get by. What was the second part of that?
That's enough. We got...
Oh, bankruptcy. I failed to pass this bill on bankruptcy, which I think could have had an effect on where we are today. In the bankruptcy court today, if you go in with a pile of debts, there are only a handful of things which are not dischargeable. Bankruptcy lawyers here can fill this in. It's been a few years. Tax payments, student loans. But when it comes to your obligations to pay, your loan obligations, the bankruptcy court can rewrite the terms of all of them except for your primary residence. So if people were facing foreclosure and went into bankruptcy court under my bill, the bankruptcy judge would say to the bank, finally get all the banks who have a piece of it in one room and say, if this guy's still working, he can make a payment, and you've got to either come up with an arrangement for him to stay in that home, or I'll come up with it. And that is the incentive for a lot of these to be worked out. What's the alternative? The alternative is plywood and weeds, plumbing gutted, gangs hanging out, a fire, the house being torn down, and a vacant lot. I've just told you the story of my hometown of East St. Louis. And sadly, it is going to be the story of neighborhoods around the Chicagoland area if this foreclosure thing keeps playing out.
Okay. We've got three real quick ones to get off the topic for a second. Quick answers. Here we go. This is from Steve Frankel, Union of Concerned Scientists.
I love unions.
Even the science, I tell you. Don't tell Ron. Given this year's extreme weather, how can we protect EPA's authority to keep our air clean and address climate change?
So think about this for a minute. It was 6 months ago when Chicago faced the biggest blizzard, one of the biggest in its history, remember? And a number of people died, and there were billions of dollars in damage. It was just 4 weeks ago when we had the largest recorded rainfall in modern history in Chicago. And we have now reached the point where the average is 9 $1 billion disasters a year in America. We're at 8 right now this year. I had a hearing on this recently. And you know, when you start talking about this, I say to my friend, Mr. Frankel, when you start talking about this, people say, oh, don't get into this global warming baloney. You know, that tree-hugging Al Gore, we're not going to go that way. So I said, well, let's keep those folks out of the room. Instead, let's bring in the insurance industry. So the property and casualty insurance industry came in and said, the weather has gone crazy on us. We expect it to get worse and the losses to increase. And one of them said, you can bet that for the rest of your life, you will say every summer, this is the hottest summer I have ever experienced in my life. Did you look at the map this morning? How many communities across America are showing 106 and 108 degrees? It used to just be Needles, California. Now it's moving. And I think we are foolish to ignore this. I'm not sure we can turn it around, but we can certainly stop it from getting worse. And it means taking carbon and pollution seriously and taking the EPA seriously.
Nice short answer. Another quick answer from this question is from Mark Weiermuller. With no money, is high-speed rail dead in Illinois?
I don't know how much further it will go, but the money that we're spending now has been appropriated, and it will be spent across the state. I think it's going to be not only created jobs, but it's going to be a good infrastructure investment. Part of my speech, which I didn't have time to get into, is the fact that the House, in this whole discretionary budget thing, I mentioned transportation, the House has told us what the next transportation bill will be for America. It is the first time in 56 years that we will cut spending on a transportation bill over the previous bill, and they're cutting it by 1/3. 1/3 cut in the investment in infrastructure in America. If you've ever been to China, and I was there over Easter, and look at the massive infrastructure investment going on there, you have to say they're betting on the future. I'm not sure we are when we cut back in key areas. There are ways to invest. Infrastructure bank may be a possibility, or others, but if we don't keep an eye on government's role in infrastructure, which is one of the real economic motivators, we're going to pay for it.
Along those lines, we have Steve Schlickman, who now has the real pressure of working at a university. I understand that, Steve. Can you comment on the reauthorization of the highway transit program and the need to extend the federal gas tax?
Steve, the problem with the federal gas tax, and Bull Simpson talked about going up 15 cents a gallon, is it would have been a killer to this economy in just the last few months. I mean, when I asked retailers who came to Washington to talk about a number of issues, what's the number one economic problem? They said it's the price of gasoline. When the price of gasoline reaches a certain point, people on marginal incomes realize they're putting the money into the tank, and they're not going to drive that truck or car to the store to buy anything. So I understand it, that a gas tax is right for our long-term infrastructure investment, but at this moment in time, I think it would be counterproductive to the economy, and it is, sadly, unless we find a way to change this, a very regressive tax.
Last separate issue, this is from Doug Schnelkerberg, close enough. Greater Chicago Food Depository. How do we ensure the safety net, including SNAP, is protected during the deliberations of the Super Congress?
SNAP is the new word for food stamps. And what we're talking about here is, if you have any connection with a food pantry, talk to these folks about what's happening. The folks that are coming in now, many of them are working, but they're working in low-income jobs. And they move from food depository to food depository to supplement their income. I've seen these food pantries in DuPage County. I've seen them all over the city of Chicago and all over the state. Sadly, they are doing a record business of people who are coming in needing a helping hand. I hear some people lament the food stamps. Well, it's a damn shame that so darn many people are using that. Well, it's a damn shame too damn many people are hungry in this country too. And I think we have got to make sure that we maintain this safety net, and God bless the Chicago Food Depository and all the folks engaged in it. For the dollar spent, they get more out of it than anybody.
Okay. We got to get some easier names for the moderator to pronounce. J.D., right over here. Bindenagel. Just got a big job, right? What's your big job? Where? Oh, wrong one.
Right over there.
Did you get a big job? Okay, the hell with you. Okay. From DePaul University. I see DePaul University. It's confused. Thanks for funding the Pell Grant. I concur. Investment in America's students. Can you convince the Senate to continue to invest in America?
So Pell Grant is one of the casualties. It's in that 12% slice. And if we're going to keep cutting back on that, there'll be less money available. Having said that, you know I have a point of view when it comes to for-profit schools. I really believe that we have allowed this to get completely out of hand. These for-profit schools are multiplying like rabbits. Right now, the for-profit schools have 10% of the post-high school graduates. They receive 25% of all federal aid to education, and they're responsible for 44% of student loan defaults, more than twice the number, dramatically more than twice the number at your school. What's going on? They're dragging these kids in through the internet and telling them you can go to college, you can be fill in the blank. All you have to do is borrow enough money, and they do. And their parents sign on, and they can't get a job, and they default, and they're deep in debt. And here they are, 26, 27 years old, living in their parents' basement, paying $900 a month for the rest of their life. Now that is disgusting. whether it's student loans or Pell Grants, we got to clean up our act here. We've got to make sure these are accredited institutions, and I believe there are good for-profit schools. Let me make that clear. But some of them are just terrible. And if we don't clean up the ranks of those schools, they'll be draining away the limited resources we have for Pell and student loans.
Good answer. Boy, guy has a political career ahead of him, Bruce. I mean, that's a hell of an answer. Okay, a couple of more because a lot of these are repetitious. This is from everyone. Don't we have any Irish people in this room who can, so I could read the names? Maria D. Yes, Maria, where are you?
Americana.
What's your last name? Perfect. Your opinion about a new immigration reform?
Where do I start? I'm not going to say this, but I will just tell you I'm in favor of comprehensive immigration reform, and I believe that we need to move on this and quickly. And what has happened sadly, is that over the last 10 years, I have lost virtually all Republican support for this. There was a time when I had to fight with Senator Orrin Hatch about who would have the lead name on the DREAM Act. Now he won't vote for it. And I use him as an example, and Orrin's my friend, but within some Republican ranks, conservative ranks, they just won't touch immigration issues. And we've got to do this on a bipartisan basis. You know how I feel about the DREAM Act. We've talked about that many times. We've also got to deal with the fact that 10 or 11 million people are here undocumented, and they are an essential part of our economy. Whether it's hotels or restaurants, they do jobs most people won't. And I hope we can come up with a fair way to deal with this. I'm trying behind the scenes to engage some Republican support. It's tough.
Doesn't Hatch have up for re-election? You know that new word in politics? You don't want to be primaried? That's part I take. Host and moderator, you got to remember who he is. Okay. Now, because this is a city club, Mr. Senator Durbin, we have to end this with a couple of sandbags, okay? You could handle it. I see on all those stations. Ken Griffiths, who always writes clearly, Wolf Point Strategies. What events in your upbringing confirm your beliefs that government makes better decisions than the individual?
I guess the winning World War II was a start. The fact that I couldn't have gone to college without a student loan was a start. The fact that many of us who have faced medical challenges in our family, pray to God the National Institutes of Health will continue to do their research work, another indication. And I was kind of raised, I won't get into the religious part of this, into a belief in social justice. And I think there are times when government has to be there to help the helpless and create opportunity for people who otherwise wouldn't have it.
Well, let's see if he knocks the next sandbag out of the park, okay? Some sandbag. Carol Bell. Carol, where are you? Carol?
Back to back.
All right, now normally I don't take questions from the press because you can get at this guy later, but we got to find a sandbag for him or else we'll lose our credibility as a city club. Will there be an African-American candidate being considered for the federal district judicial appointment?
I'm trying to think about this round and of those who currently have their names before the White House. No, there is not an African American on this list. I think we have some 6 names between Senator Kirk and myself, but I think you will find within the list a great amount of diversity, which I've tried to bring to the bench and I believe is important.
Okay, the last question, and this is from Nancy Shepardon. Nancy, where are you? Did I come close?
Way in the back.
8th District Committeeman. Which party? Democratic Party. You're in with a lot of people who probably, no, I knew I did. Here we go. Nancy's last question. Knock it out of the park, Senator. What do you propose the Congress do to stimulate the economy given the political realities you face? 25 words or less.
Well, That is, it's hard because I've just described to you all of the different schemes to reduce spending by the government and reduce the role of government. And so the question is, what can we do right? Well, education is one. I believe most of us wouldn't be in this room were it not for the opportunity of education and making sure that that's there. Training and retraining for jobs. We live in a volatile global economy. The job my dad had and my mom had when they were first married, those jobs don't exist anymore. And so anybody who has a fighting chance has to be in a position where they can get retrained. And if God has given them the gift of good intelligence, can learn some skills that will take them forward. I mentioned infrastructure earlier, and I honestly believe that. When they tell me in China that in the next 5 years they are going to build 60 new airports that can land every aircraft that Boeing makes, I'm thinking these folks are investing in a future, and we need to be doing exactly the same thing. So those are the areas that I'd move into. Thanks, everybody. Enjoyed the visit.